Okay, well, welcome to this session of Drop In and Learn. And I'd like to welcome all of you that are attending live right now, and also welcome our viewers on the YouTube Drop In and Learn channel as well. My guest today is Kathy Macdonald, former Calgary police officer and specialist in crime prevention, and author also of this book right here, Crime Prevention Awareness, Awareness, Prevention, and Response. So first of all, welcome to the program, Kathy.
Oh, thank you very much.
Now, tell us a little bit about why you chose to write this book. I mean, I'm sure it's for the millions of dollars that you're going to be making as a result of it, right?
Absolutely. No. It's been a real work of love. It's almost everything that I did through my career. I was with the Calgary Police Service, as you know, for 25 years. I retired in 2013. It was kind of a natural progression for me to just go into doing presentations, because that's what I had been doing within the police service. And a lot of the questions would come in from the community or at the presentations that I was at. So I would take those questions and the questions from the media, and I put those into the chapters, because I thought, of course, those are of most interest to people. So there are 11 chapters covering everything from, cyberbullying, data breaches, phishing, spearfishing, just privacy in general, and even a chapter on open source investigations, Dave, something that you know a lot about.
To some degree, yes. So who is the book targeted at? When you were writing the book, who was the intended audience?
Well, I think it's really a step up for anybody that wants a career in law enforcement, in public service, in justice, insurance, even the media. The great thing about the book, and not to brag or anything, but I really think that it would be a real helpful book for anybody to read that wants to have a step up and know what's going on when they get started their career, so that they can navigate the internet. And I mean, yourself, you teach this in your classes all the time, and I've taken many of your classes, learned so much, and I'm really grateful for your help on the book, Dave.
Oh, well, you're very welcome. I'm happy to help.
No, it was huge.
Ridiculously small way.
No, and actually the appendix also has all the Toddington resources in it. So it's been great from that standpoint. But I think that, you teach a lot about when you're a police officer, you get on the job, you have to go navigate. So for an example, your first day on, you go to a hit and run. Now you want to see if your suspect maybe had been drinking at the bar. So what do? You go to Facebook. Well, how do you check Facebook? Well, maybe you check on your personal Facebook account. Well, what if you find some evidence there? Now you're not really legally placed and you're checking things out on the internet. And how do you backtrack? And so I talk a lot about search and seizure, expectation of privacy, and I cover a lot of Canadian cases. So I think that would be really helpful for police and officers for sure.
Right. It's an interesting thing to me when we go back, say, 20 years, which as I'm getting older doesn't seem like all that long ago, unfortunately. But going back about 20 years, I mean, the concept of cybercrime, the concept of digital crime was really very new. I mean, there were only at the time the formation of these tech crime units. And now, 20 years later, here we are living in an information-based society where this is now of tremendous importance to rank and file police investigators, right down to the very front line. So understanding that process of how to seize, bag and tag digital devices is just one example. And as you point out, what could be the more sort of standard criminal activity that a patrol officer is going to be investigating, a hit and run, all of these sorts of things, there could be a digital component to it somehow, some information out there that could be of value to them.
Absolutely. And the other beauty of this book is that there are key terms. So if you ever had to go to court, you can look up those key terms and find out, what other officers would be using for their key terms in court. So there's some consistency as well. And of course, the discussion questions would be great for anybody that's in communications, even with the police department, because they could use this information for security awareness or for tweets for their communications department. So there's a lot of benefits anyway.
Right. Now
Yeah,
you're very well connected in the policing community throughout the
yeah.
country, and you've tapped into some remarkable resources here as well in putting the book together.
I have, and I'm really grateful for all the experts in Canada, US, even in Europe, that really helped. And I could call them up and just ask them questions. And having that expertise is really important for a book like this, for sure.
Right.
Yeah,
Well, you've got a presentation that you're going to take us through,
yeah,
and one of the things I'll point out to the people that are viewing live right now on the webinar, if you have questions for Kathy, please use the chat feature. Ask the questions in the chat feature. I'll take a look at those, and then I will forward your questions off to Kathy for her response to that. So, Kathy, maybe take us
okay.
into this.
Well,
And walk us through. And it would seem to me as well that here we are now in amongst a global health crisis, a pandemic. Maybe we're sort of seeing some light at the end of the tunnel. I think it maybe is just the end of the beginning.
yeah,
We're still in for a whole lot more. And one of the things I find fascinating is the significant number of scam attempts that we're seeing right now. I mean,
yeah,
according to our own Canadian Anti-Fraud Center, about $1.2 million of Canadians' money has been defrauded from the beginning of March to the present. It
yeah,
would occur to me that people are nervous, they're uptight.
yeah,
I got a text message yesterday telling me that my emergency benefits,
yeah,
I needed to click on a link. And if you think about it, people are anxious. They may be awaiting these types of benefits from the government
yeah.
right now, and they're just not thinking. I mean, it would occur to me that this is a very ripe environment for fraudsters right now.
It is, and that's a perfect lead in, Dave, because one of the chapters that I did was on social engineering, and right now we are dealing with a lot of social engineering. So I'll just put on my presentation here and kind of lead us through this, but that was a perfect lead in to that, Dave. Right now, for any of your viewers that are not familiar with social engineering, these techniques are often used by spammers and scammers and people that do phishing and spear phishing attacks. And these types of techniques target our emotions. And of course, they overpower our sense of better judgment. And I can't think of a time like this where this sort of thing has happened. I don't know about you, but I know that most of the people here in Calgary, and I mean, just from what I read as well, we are dealing with a lot of emotions, just like you had mentioned. We're confused, we're fearful, we're panicked, we're worried. We feel powerless in a lot of ways. And we also want to help. And this is where these scammers often come out at the times when we are the most distracted, you know, floods, fires, earthquakes, things like that. And they ask for our money because we want to donate. And we're grateful for those people that are working on the front line, and we want to help them, and we're not sure how to do that. So our emotions are very powerful, and these social engineers, of course, play on this, especially at this time. Now, I mean, not only are we separated from our friends and our family and our work and our parents and our grandparents, but we're also relying on the media. And of course, they're highly dramatic right now. And they also have some confusing information. And I just want to play a little bit here. We've got this fellow here from the CBC that on April the 4th says that there's 14 people in ICU. 11 days later, there's actually 4 less people in ICU. And it says no new deaths reported. So I always question, you know, adding deaths into the headline, that kind of elevates our emotions. Of course, we have just, you know, wrong information here. They had the wrong information on CNN. We have these disinformation campaigns allegedly from China, but we also have contrary information. And I mean, by that, I mean, you know, we're told, oh, wear masks, and then don't wear masks. Oh, no, you're supposed to wear masks. And then, of course, the ibuprofen, you know, don't take ibuprofen. Yes, take ibuprofen. We also have, like, going into the next wave, we have words like worse, So again, our emotions are constantly being attacked, and we're worried and concerned. And then the visuals, with all of these newsletters or news articles, Dave, I'm sure you've probably seen the visuals. And this poor lady here, she's getting a mask put on. I don't know why, but it looks painful. So we have these visuals going. So it's a perfect storm right now for cybercrime. And it's actually a cybercrime pandemic. Like you mentioned, some of those numbers, 260% increase in malicious URLs. So we're seeing phishing, spear phishing, all sorts of scams, of course, the malicious URLs. We're seeing a lot of counterfeit products, tons of spam. So there's a huge increase in cybercrime right now, and mainly dealing and attacking and targeting our emotions.
Is it fair to say that scammers, fraudsters, what they are relying on is getting us to make an emotional decision as opposed to a logical decision? So a split-second emotional decision is what they are trying to prey on, and we're ripe for this right now.
Absolutely, that's exactly the point, Dave. It's our emotions are incredibly strong, and so they go after those ones that, you know, we have a lot of empathy and trust. We feel sad, we're excited, you know, all of those emotions. And that's why we see specifically phishing, spear phishing at this time, because it really tugs at your heartstrings. And I have a few examples of this here. Here we've got a link sent from the Public Health Agency of Canada. So it sounds really legitimate, right? So we should trust this. I've never heard of this agency, but it could be a watering hole attack where you go to this link and it's a drive-by download of malware when you get there, or you could click on that link and be infected with some kind of malware, ransomware, or something like that. We often see at these times where logos of legitimate organizations, Oxfam, or even during the fire at Notre Dame Cathedral, we'll see those kind of logos and those pictures that go along with it. So World Health Organization, even though this particular one has a lot of spelling mistakes and grammatical errors and such in this particular email, they do want you to click on that link to open an attachment, which is fairly common as well.
And if we look at that email from the Public Health Agency of Canada, it was support@jerseywows.com. So, I mean, that's probably a pretty good indication, taking a closer look. So stopping, stepping back, and just taking a closer look before you click on something that has triggered your emotions.
Oh, absolutely. Just slowing down.
And could you explain that? Sorry to interrupt, Kathy, but you mentioned two terms there, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people still aren't quite familiar with the definition of phishing versus spear phishing. What would be the primary difference between those two?
Well, spear phishing is more targeted, hence, you know, the spear part of it. Typically, there's a lot of reconnaissance that goes into it. They look you up in social media, find out who you are. And I'll show you a really good example at the end of this presentation, because I was spear phished as well. And they do more of a targeted attack where they build that trust, and it can take a longer amount of time. But phishing typically is just a spam type of thing, and they send, you know, millions of those out at a time, whereas spear phishing, there's a little bit more time and work. Oftentimes they target a privileged person within an organization, maybe an executive assistant or a CEO or something along that line. And I was just going to this, you know, not only email, you know, oftentimes they go after our most common business practices, but we get these phone scams. And I thought this was kind of interesting, because if you want a testing kit, press 1. If you don't want a testing kit, press 2. So either way you're pressing on this link. Here we've got people in authority. So right now, doctors, somebody official, maybe from the government, is saying, hey, you know, check out this pictures and names and hospitals. And then they add in there all of that extra information to make you feel like it is legitimate. So we've got a email, we've got phone numbers, we've got a hospital website as well. And then of course, all the fake stuff. I don't know if you're getting it, Dave, but I am. But you know, buy the counterfeit products. So there's a lot more of that. There's a real increase in that, as well as the registration of malicious URLs, so fake URLs and such, to drive business and click to websites where, you know, they're going to sweep up your information or possibly sell you something and you'll use your credit card. So we're seeing a lot of this kind of stuff as well. I know that you're doing a lot of Zoom meetings. We're all doing a lot of Zoom meetings. And so there's been a real increase in scams around these fake Zoom meeting requests. And of course, the payload is when you sign up. And of course, you put your credentials in there and then they go in, they can change your password, and now they've got access to your Zoom account. And if you think about what's in your Zoom account, you've got your email in your settings, you maybe have your photo, you've got some virtual backgrounds maybe, like today. You might have your past meetings and maybe some of those saved to iCloud, and maybe some of those were confidential. So they get a lot of access to it as well. So because this is one of our most common things to do these days, it's a natural vector for them to attack.
One of the things I find interesting about this as well is that we often use the same password over and over and over.
Yes.
And now we're creating a Zoom account. So this is the perfect, to use the term attack vector, in which to get an email address and a password. Now, if you think about that you just happen to be using the same password on Facebook, what's the first thing that someone's going to do? Take that email address, attempt to use that password on Facebook and everything else they can think of, and it might start getting you access to those accounts as well.
Absolutely.
That's another thing we've got to be careful about. And then plus, when we think about phishing and spear phishing, many of us will have just signed up for Zoom accounts.
Yes.
And therefore we get an email to confirm something, and it seems legitimate. I mean, it's funny, we recently signed up for WebEx. Many of our clients can't use Zoom. So we signed up for WebEx. I actually got legitimate information from Cisco Systems today regarding billing, and I actually tossed it in the trash, realizing afterwards, no, that was legitimate. So it's interesting how it kind of flips around the other way as well.
Yeah, it really does. So I guess what I was thinking about this presentation, Dave, and I know when I got into police, and back probably when you did as well, you would go out to a scene of a B&E or a car prowling or something like that, and you just, common sense would say, hey, you know, put up a light, use an alarm or something like that. It wasn't until I got into crime prevention that I understood that there are actually principles around crime prevention. And once you understand those principles, I think what it really does, especially in the time and age of pandemic, is it not only actually reduces crime, reduces the virus, but it also reduces our fear, which is very strong. Our emotions are very strong. And sometimes, you know, especially for people, I remember back when we used to do audits and such through the police, through crime prevention, there were people that were afraid to go out of their house or apartment because they thought that they were going to be attacked. So it's again reducing that fear of getting the virus. And I've been thinking about how this works, and so I wanted to just kind of present this and give some ideas to the viewers that they could take home, their basic principles, and use them in their family to make them feel safer. One of the principles is called the 4 Ds of crime prevention. It's deny, deter, detect, and delay. It's hard to say, but it's really simple, and it's been around for many, many decades. But when you apply it to this virus, for an example, we've got denying the cross-contamination in long-term care centers. I mean, the seniors are most at risk. So instead of allowing people to work in different long-term care centers, they are denying them access to those and just keeping them in the one. Makes sense. And it's called, you know, it's part of that 4 Ds. We've got masks that deter. We've got body temperature to detect. And of course, we can delay by, I thought this was a really good example, flattening the curve. Here is a fellow that had all these RVs and they were just sitting empty. So he was donating them to people that worked in the front line, healthcare workers, that they could park them at their home and then they could live in them, so that it would, I guess, flatten the curve by preventing the possible infection from the hospital to the home. So Again, just a really quick example of deny, deter, detect, and delay, the 4Ds. Crime prevention through environmental design, you're probably quite familiar with this. We used to do a lot of these audits in crime prevention. We also did training, and it's based around these 4 concepts, and they sound like a lot of words, but they make sense, and we can apply CPTED to what we're going through right now. And I'll just show you what I mean. Accessibility control. We see signs everywhere, and they're saying, you know, only a certain number of people are allowed in. Now, the great thing about CPTED is it influences our human behavior, and it doesn't just jump out at you and say, hey, this is what we're doing. It tells us almost subliminally, and it it influences our human behavior in a space, and that's the environmental design part of it. So we see a lot of the accessibility control. Natural surveillance. I don't know about you, but I'm looking out my front window all the time, and people see me, I see them, and we feel safer. This is one of the concepts of CPTED, where you trim the branches on your tree up 6 feet and down so you have a clear line of sight. But there's so many more people out and about these days, and we're all watching each other, and that's important. It helps us feel safer. Territorial reinforcement. When you go to Safeway or Costco or any of these stores, London Drugs, you see these big rings on the ground, and they don't say, hey, stand in that ring, that piece of chalk or that piece of paint that's drawn there, but you know that that's where you're supposed to stand. And that's territorial reinforcement. And the last one is maintenance of space. And this is important because right now, everybody's got hand sanitizer, they're spraying down countertops, and it really affects, I think it's going to affect business in the future, because if you see people spraying down countertops on a regular basis, you feel like they really care about that space, and you're going to go back. You feel like you're in a safer place, and this is all part of the CPTED principle.
So it's interesting taking these crime prevention models then and applying them to dealing with a pandemic.
Yes.
I'm particularly interested on the territorial reinforcement.
Yeah.
The idea and the notion that we're going to put spots in which people should be standing to enforce that social distancing.
Yeah.
I know myself, I try and limit my supermarket visits to about once every 2 weeks, preferably once every month if I can.
Yeah.
Arrows down the aisles,
yes,
creating one-way, and yet I would say only half the people are actually are doing what they're supposed to be doing. How can we go those steps further? So signs telling people what to do, but there may be people that are just not being mindful. It could be intentional. They don't think the signs apply to them, but also just not being mindful and not being aware. Are there things that we can do both in the crime prevention model and also in COVID world to kind of channel people to do the right thing? And I know that might be a complicated answer.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that as a community, you start to, a lot of people don't even notice that there are shopping carts laid out so that you have to form those Disneyland lineups or those circles, and you don't really know until somebody directs you that way. And it doesn't take long before I think the community almost doesn't police itself, but they really take care of each other, and because we're all concerned for each other, and that's the beauty of crime prevention. And some of these principles where we have those neighborhood discussions in the summer, because we get to meet our neighbors and then we watch out for each other, and it's a natural thing to do, and I think it's going to happen naturally. Yeah. So
tell me about the natural surveillance, because the idea that it's common sense, it makes sense that we cut back on bushes and branches, making our residences more visible and therefore potentially less susceptible to being broken into. But the idea, if we sort of flip that around a little bit, one of the things I noticed in British supermarkets starting about 7 or 8 years ago was a cardboard cutout of a police officer, life size, as you walked into the supermarket. And psychologically, the way that it was explained to me is it just gives you a sense that's a little bit of a reminder of the fact that you could be being watched. It's a little bit of a reminder that law enforcement is close by, even though it's cardboard cutout. I've seen the same thing. The city of Coquitlam here in British Columbia had cardboard cutouts of Mounties holding radar guns. They weren't real, but nonetheless, it reminded drivers to slow down. Do you think that there's anything that could be done in this way to remind people of their civic responsibility when it comes to safe practices during a pandemic?
Yeah, you know, you really have to be careful with some of that because there is some liability. It's like putting up the fake CCTV camera outside your home, and then somebody feels safer because it's there, and then they're getting rolled or something like that. They're getting robbed, so they run up to it and they wave their hand saying "help, help, help," and it's a fake box. So there have been some liability cases, especially if they think that the police are watching or monitoring and that sort of thing. So it's more of a natural thing, trimming the branches, and it's just a natural thing to be able to see your neighbor, see their front door, clearing the space around your front door so that the police, as they're driving past, can see your house number and that sort of thing. So that's the safety part of it. Yeah. One of the principles as well, Dave, is around in cybersecurity. It's called CIA, and it's been around as well for a long time, and it makes perfect sense. And it's something that we can apply right now, specifically confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So I'll just really, you know, need to know basis. There's a lot of these coronavirus alert apps that are coming out right now. Or you're in social media on Facebook and you say, oh, my neighbor just tested positive or something like that. Even though everybody's talking about this stuff, we really need to think about confidentiality on the long term. Integrity, making sure that our data is not being tampered with and that we have available access to it in its correct form, and as well availability. Right now, I'm sure that you're dealing with this, but you got to have that bandwidth and you got to have access to your devices because everybody right now is relying on that. So I know I do a lot of these talks and I always give a few pieces of advice, but I thought I'd just do something a little bit along the line of this pandemic. And I thought it's so important right now to do a risk assessment on your own personal data, whatever you want to call it. And just, you know, where is it and who's got access to it, especially with these alerts and these apps. And you think that you're doing a safe thing, but who's got access to it? When does it end? Where does it start? Where does it end? That sort of thing. So thinking about your data, where it is, setting up your two-factor authentication. If you're not sure whether a website or your shopping or your banking has two-factor on it or your social media, twofactorauth.org is a great website. It's got it all listed there. Of course, back up everything to make sure that you've got that available data and that it hasn't been tampered with, say, for example, if you get hit by ransomware. Cover your camera lens, or make sure that when you are on a Zoom session that your camera isn't going to go off automatically. We've seen some disastrous photos of that. I'm sure you have too. Buy your domain name. And this is important. I mean, I've got mine, you've got yours. You never know when you might need it, but you want to make sure it's available to you and to your child. I think that's important as well. And of course, I think this is really big right now, is recognize what is typical behavior, and then anything outside of that, you know, red flags should go up, and just kind of stop and think before you do it and act, especially if your emotions are involved. You know, you feel sad or happy or excited or really, really panicky. That's the time to just step back and don't click on anything. Don't give your credit card information up. Just to stop and wait and maybe talk to somebody, talk to a friend or something before you act.
And I guess that's the challenging thing now, because when we think about what is typical activity, everything is atypical right now. I mean, nothing is really typical at all. So I guess that's to the advantage of the fraudsters once again.
It is, but you know, if you think about it, you know, if you are averaging one Zoom meeting a day and all of a sudden you get like 10 requests, or if there's a person that contacts you or an agency that contacts you and they've never contacted you before, you know, you can ask, well, why? If I'm getting text messages and I've always only ever emailed, you know, what's that about? So you can always ask these questions and do your own open source investigation, right?
Exactly.
I just wanted to draw your attention. I know your guest last week mentioned, I always call it Pwned. He called it Pwned, Have I Been Pwned? I really love this website because, again, we all rely on our email addresses to make sure that it has integrity and availability, and it is, you know, somewhat confidential. To go onto this website, and you just put your email address in there, and you can check to see if it has ever been caught in one of these data breaches. And Troy Hunt, who runs this website, he's got like over 9 billion email addresses that, you know, have been breached in these data breaches, and you can just check where and when, and it's a really good thing to do.
And it is important because I'm a strong advocate of changing your passwords on a regular basis, because you never really know when a breach may occur. One of our clients this last week, and to speak to Carl Swanee last week with EchoSec, demonstrating Beacon, we used Beacon, we put in their domain of this particular company, and the number of people that ended up coming back, the number of email addresses and associated passwords, I could only describe as absolutely stunning. It was in the hundreds. And it's not just that we've now got passwords. Maybe they've been changed, maybe they haven't, but we're getting names of people and then starting to go and search for those people and their associated organization. Again, it is perfect for spear phishing attacks, even though they have had password changes since that time. So we've got to constantly be mindful of the fact that our information can be stolen from so many different sites. So use different passwords, as troublesome as that is.
Absolutely. And you know, if you have a real simple password, they have this password cracking software that runs, you know, zillions of algorithms a second. And if it's a real simple password, they can figure that out pretty quickly. And then they've also got your email address. So then they go and they see where else, you know, most people use 25 different websites. They'll check those 25 websites, and it's possible that you've used that password on one of those. So, you know, changing up your password, not using it on multiple locations is a really good idea.
Right. And the brute force attackers, as you pointed out, I mean, a dictionary attack is the first thing that they'll do. They'll capture it within
Absolutely.
seconds. Really perfect.
I just wanted to end, I mentioned earlier that I was a victim of a spear phishing attack, although I didn't get captured. But I thought I'd just show you, because it's a perfect example of some social engineering. So I have a website and I do presentations, as I mentioned at the beginning. So I get this email just before Christmas, and it's from this reverend in St. Andrew's Church in Aberdeen, Scotland. And of course, you know, right away, you know, your intuition tells you this is fake, just because it's a reverend and it's, you know, from out of town and that sort of thing. So you're thinking, yeah, this is really, but you really want to believe it's true, because I do presentations, and they invited me to speak at this conference, and I've never been to Aberdeen, and I'm, you know, got some Scottish blood, you know, and I would like to wear my kilt. So I was getting excited about this thing, right? So I thought, okay, what am I going to do? So I did some open source investigation myself. I just went to St. Andrew's Church in Aberdeen, Scotland, and I looked it up, and sure enough, there was the Reverend, Reverend Pulalan. And so I thought, well, you know, but I knew it was fake. And so I went and I found the administrator's email address, and I sent her an address. I didn't click on the link inside the email, which is really important. Independent of that, I went to St. Andrew's Church. And of course, I sent her an email. She sent me one right back, and she said that the Reverend's email account had been hacked, and they were receiving all sorts of, you know, fake, and somebody had been using it to do just what they had done to me. So of course, what they wanted me to say was, oh, I would love to come to Aberdeen and speak at your conference. And then probably the next thing they would say is, send us your bank account, we'll send you a deposit for your presentation fees. So that's typical, but anyway, she said that the police were unable to do anything about it. So these cyber criminals, you got to just be on the lookout for them.
Yeah, exactly. So when you think about the cost benefit analysis of committing a cyber crime opposed to a physical crime,
right?
Physical crime, the chances you're going to get caught are that much higher. The punishment that will be meted out if you are found guilty and convicted is going to be substantially higher. And the fact is that even with quite successful fraud scams, most police agencies, and especially given its multi-jurisdictional nature, they're not even going to start a file on it. So it's a pretty good thing, I guess, if you're into crime.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, they're all over the world, and they use VPNs and they use Tor, and they can hide where they're at, and it's pretty tough for police even to track these people down. So.
Right, exactly. We do have a comment here from Maren. Okay. Rather than using multiple passwords and trying to remember them, using tools like LastPass can help with this. It can create incredibly complex passwords with no need for you to remember them. I've got some opinions on LastPass. Maybe Kathy, you can tell us a little bit about what you think about LastPass.
Well, I seem to think that they were breached at one point. So, you know, I mean, these password apps are really actually helpful, and they help you manage, as long as you've got one really, really tough, you know, password that's in your head, and you're never going to write it down or give it out at all. But, you know, I don't know. Besides that, they are helpful for some people, for sure.
Right, and that's one of the things I always think about is what's the weakest link in the chain. I've heard good things about it. What I do personally is I've got a number of tiers in my password system. So those passwords I don't really care about, accounts for websites, for example, that it doesn't matter if they get breached. And then it sort of moves up in order of importance. So at the very top of the heap, where I have very few accounts that might be of that level of importance to me, then it's a very complex password. So tiering it out is what I try and do, and then it makes it manageable, that I've only got 7 passwords to remember rather than 32 different passwords to remember.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good way to do it as well.
Perfect. And thank you for your comment, Erin.
Oh, that's good.
Okay.
So that's about it, Dave. I mean,
oh, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Now, tell me a little bit about the book here. So we'll just take you off of your viewing screen there.
Okay. Oh, I've got my little, yeah.
Perfect. Okay, we're back with you again. So the book, tell us where we can get the book.
Oh, it is available at emont.ca/CAPR. And actually, I've got it on my last slide if you want to put it up there, Dave.
Okay, perfect. We'll definitely be putting that up as well.
Yeah, it's available online through Pwned Publishing, and they're out of Toronto. They do a lot of criminal justice books, law books, books for law enforcement as well. And they've been around for a long time, and they're just they've been so helpful to me. Seeing that this was the first book that I mean, I'm not a writer. I thought it was going to be pretty easy, but it was pretty tough. And they walked me through it, and I learned a lot through this whole session. So it's been really good, and I hope people will enjoy this book.
And thank you very much. I found it thoroughly enjoyable, by the way.
Oh,
and I would imagine that kathymacdonald.ca is another place that people can find out how to purchase it as well.
Absolutely.
Right. Thank you so much, Kathy, for taking time out of your busy schedule to attend this session of Drop In and Learn. I believe we may have just one more question from Tom. Is there more of a tendency now for small company websites to deliberately not disclose or admit when they have been hacked so they might avoid public wrath? This is a really good question, and it's an important problem. Even larger companies as well, they may not want to admit that they've been hacked because of the breach of public trust, if you will. And we've seen it with Air Canada, British Airways, Experia, just a huge number of major breaches in which people have lost information. What are your thoughts on smaller companies? I mean, we've seen this with larger companies. What about the smaller ones?
Well, absolutely. You know, small companies, small and medium-sized companies are very much at risk because the majority of companies are small and medium-sized companies, and they can't afford the tools and the training and all the security people that goes into protecting them. So they are a real target, and they do collect very important information. So I guess from that standpoint too, to make sure that you reduce your liability by only collecting the information that really you need to. If you are collecting information that has a real risk of significant harm to a person, like health information, that sort of thing, you know, you should invest in all that security that goes along with protecting it. Only collect what you need, tell people why you're collecting it, and make sure that you protect it. But yeah, absolutely, small and medium-sized businesses are at risk, and if they are collecting that kind of information, then privacy commissioners can get involved if there is a breach and that kind of information is exposed to the public, so, or disclosed to the public after it's stolen. So it's really important. You have to just do that risk assessment on your data and find out what it is that you're collecting, why you're collecting it, and can I protect it?
And beyond a moral obligation, there is a legal obligation in Canada, the Privacy Electronic Documents Act,
Yes.
and also in Europe, the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulations. You could find yourself afoul of the law if you don't take adequate provisions to protect that information as well.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much, Kathy. It's been a real pleasure. We do thank you also, the attendees today, and thank you for your questions, for joining us here on Drop In and Learn. We do ask that you check out our YouTube channel, Drop In and Learn on YouTube. We do record these sessions and we make them available for future viewing as well. Next week, we have Julie Tillotson, who's a crime analyst working in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Julie is an expert witness in the Manitoba Supreme Court on the presentation of evidence that has been sourced online. So if you've ever had questions about the best way to preserve what it is you're finding online as evidence and how to present that in court as well, Julie is going to be here next week. Just go to dropinandlearn.org and you can sign up there. Once again, thank you very much, Kathy. And
yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, all of you, for joining us. And we'll see you next week.
Thanks so much, Dave.